For first, I would like to start with the land acknowledgement. We recognize that we are on the traditional territories of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. These territories are now home to many diverse Indigenous, Inuit, and Métis peoples. Toronto is covered by the Dish with One Spoon Treaty, Treaty 13, and Williams Treaties. We are committed to working alongside and taking direction from the original caretaker of this land in all our calls for justice and freedom. Our fight for prison abolition is inherently an anti-colonial project aligned with struggles for liberation, sovereignty, social and environmental justice. No prisons or jails on stolen land. I would like to introduce our panelists today. We have Laureen Saint-Amour, we have Angela Voss, Yusuf Fakiri, Sean Spalding's sister, and we will be joined by Kevin Egan in just a minute. What I would like to do to start this webinar is just thank you all for being here. This is a really overlooked and not talked about topic, and it is happening too frequently within our jails and our prisons. And so I really would just like to start this webinar off with, we'll just go roundtable style, so all of you will have an opportunity to answer. And I really just want you to tell me about your loved one. I want to know about the hobbies and about the things that made them smile. You just tell us what your loved one meant to you. So maybe Laureen, would you like to start and introduce your loved one and just tell us about them?
Okay. Well, my son Justin was 31 when he passed away. He died in Ottawa Carleton Detention Center. He was on life supports for about a week. Now, my son Justin, he loved to be outside. He loved nature. He loved to joke around and make people laugh. And he loved his mom and his father. And, you know, we were like his whole life to him. Now, the day my son ended up in prison at the Ottawa Carleton Detention Center, he had gone to the Montfort Hospital here in Ottawa. And he told them that he was feeling suicidal and that he was schizophrenic. The doctor looked at him, said, "No, you're not schizophrenic and you're not suicidal." And so then he threatened his ODSP worker and said, "Well, I'll just go back and sleep on the graves. I have more in common with dead people than living people." And my son was also self-medicating with opiates. So he was abusing drugs as well. I have taken him prior to his death. I've taken him to detox here in Ottawa. I've tried to help my son as best I could. I've had my son Form 2, where I've gone to the courthouse and got him arrested and taken to a mental health facility, a hospital here in Ottawa called the Royal Ottawa Hospital, where they have mental health services. And he was kept there for 2 months. Now we fast forward to when he went to jail, and he was on suicide watch right away. And all they have to do is have a nurse come and check him out and say he's fine. And all they do is take his word for it that he's fine. So he's telling these doctors, "I'm fine. I'm not going to commit suicide." And they don't put him on suicide watch. And a couple hours later, "Isn't my son dead?" I get a phone call from my husband stating that we have to go to the hospital, that my son is in the hospital. Our son is in the hospital and there's something wrong with him. We didn't know what. So we proceed to go to the hospital, and we're told by a doctor that your son is dead. You can talk to him, but he won't be able to hear you. And that he was on life support. Now, it was just awful. My son was a loving, caring person. And then he's put into jail where nobody cares about him. What mental health is there in jail? You have guards who have half a day training in mental health. We've torn down and closed asylums because of their inhumane treatment. So why are we putting our mentally ill into jail? I can't understand that. I can't answer that question. And I don't understand why I have to even be asking that question. Why did my son have to die in a jail cell when he was mentally ill and needed help? And my son is by far the only one. I would suffice it to say that pretty much every death that has happened within the jail system, pretty much 90% of them had mental illness, if not more. I would stake my life on that. And that's what I can tell you about my son.
Lorraine. And I appreciate your advocacy and your drive and your passion. And yeah, I think it speaks to a lot of the mental health that we do have inside as well, undiagnosed, is also very detrimental. And what we've seen over these past 2 years with the COVID pandemic and our folks inside that are being locked down 23 and a half hours a day. No programs, no contact, no phone calls, no hygiene, no showers on a regular basis, right? And so it really, go ahead.
My son passed pre-COVID, and all the things that you're mentioning during COVID was happening pre-COVID. So there's really no difference. It's been happening pre-COVID. So, and it's going to continue to happen during COVID. And when COVID's long gone, if it ever does go away, it's going to continue.
You were right there. COVID just exacerbated it and just made it more public, I guess. But
yes.
Thank you so much for sharing. And why don't we move over to Angela?
Guys. Oh, I'm not on mute. Well, thank you, Lindsay, for having me here today to talk about Jordan and to share his story and our story as it continues on. It's sad that we have to gather like this all the time, but I'm so proud of every one of us for standing up for our family members, being here strong and showing solidarity to each other, as well as to our commitment to the public to try to make things better for people in the future. Jordan suffered a lot of devastating negligence and lack of policy and insufficient investigations that have literally ripped our lives apart. I screamed for help, and they gave me my son, Jordan, back in a casket to an urn to sit on a shelf with every dream that I've had for my family. And it's hard to move on from these things because he's always here, and the nightmares don't end. They just continue on. Jordan had a history of physical, mental health, and substance use disorder. We had reported that Jordan had previously concealed drugs within his body to hide things from friends and family because we tried to protect him by taking things from him. Being in custody or going to custody had nothing to do with that behavior. We knew that he had done this going into the hospital and told Dr. Tang. Before he was transferred to custody, we told them again. The coroner's report is a false and misleading statement and clearly identifies the stigma that I'm dealing with. Along with anger and behavioral issues, personality traits, if you're not treated well, these are the labels they present you with. Again, he is punished. even after he's gone, for the way that they have treated him. Jordan, I know, seen, held, and loved with every morsel of my soul, was a beautiful human being that loved so deeply and so unconditionally. It was the very things that smashed his soul. He used to tell me he was going to take care of me when I got old, and I really believed him. Not that he would do it himself, but he would make sure somebody good would do it. His continuous energy and playful ways had me yelling at him, either stop it, Jordan, or chasing him around a chair. I could never have beautiful hair. When you ask his friends, it's his personality, his loyalty, and his generosity that they'll never forget. Unfortunately, Jordan's dark side was the flip side. And sadly, our system for mental health failed Jordan from a young age to his adult life. When he broke, he shattered. He became a self-destructive shadow of all of his demons. But for me, I loved him through those demons and believed he could recover. The details of Jordan's death at the time were a lie, and the attending coroner, Dr. Shire, and the investigating officer, Mike Stratford, coordinated their lies to protect the murders inside of Central East Correctional Center. Imagine my shock when I seen that coroner's report about the events that had happened. I was told my son died quickly after being put in his cell. I believed he committed suicide. My son suffered from Saturday night until he died at 6:30 p.m. on Monday, begging verbally and non-verbally for help, suffering, and knowing he was going to die. The coroner's report indicates that not one opportunity, but multiple opportunities to follow a protocol within their positions to prevent everything that happened to Jordan. But the position itself was executed by person or persons that were negligent, confirmed by secondary review. A nurse that gave Gravol to silence my son's cries for help that ultimately was the reason for his imminent death. Her negligence as a nurse to perform a task that was not delegated and would never be a medical protocol as a medication to give during or after an overdose. From verbally telling him that he needed help to complete psychosis at Ross Memorial Hospital that released him back to prison, pushing at his bowels, laying naked on a cold concrete floor. The list of negligence will continue with the inquest. There's so many blank spaces. Jordan should never have died or gone to prison, but we screamed for help. I screamed for help. And unfortunately fell on a doctor's ears, like the others, had a perspective and a stigma that's been killing our mentally ill for years. Without a protocol for a psychiatrist and without a college of physicians and surgeons acting upon the stigma that causes this negligence, we keep spinning our wheels and burying our loved ones. But we haven't suffered quite enough yet, because 40% of our youth have confirmed substance use, 10 deaths a day to drug poisoning, 10 deaths a day to suicide. I don't have the numbers of the amount of people who have gone into psychosis and lost their lives, or the amount of people that have died in incarceration. Those numbers are next to impossible to find. Who do you trust when you can't trust a coroner's word, an investigating officer? You can't scream for help, and because nobody really knows what help looks like, the protocols are just not there. Sadly, the education has been here, and we've been spared no cost when it comes down to the importance of mental health, and substance use is mental health, 72 years. What we are spared is the knowledge that comes from years of studies that has gone on our government's deaf ears. Harm reduction measures have been endorsed by the World Health Organization, United Nations, as a public health measure, both in the community and prison environments, 102. They are widely recognized as legally binding human right obligations. 103, captured by Mendel's Rule 24, which requires that prisoners have access to equivalent care in the care in prisons as in the community. Our ministry in Canada has failed to implement many of these measures meaningfully. The science for COVID was meant to install fear and knowledge to every Canadian, but yet years of testing and scientific knowledge went on deaf ears. Almost 27,000 examples of our negligence just in substance use. More and more mental health is redirected to prisons because we're not spending millions of dollars on mental health. Instead, we are wasting it on disgusting buildings, negligent workers, and equipment that clearly somebody needs to know how to use. And if they do know how to use them, as they keep telling me they do, then where is the protocol for the negligence my son suffered? Twice. Who did this correct? Did this correct Jordan's life? It ended his life. Did it correct my life? It ended my life as I know it. There is no correct in these corrections. I say to end that prohibition and the hate with the education that we've had for 72 years. If mental health matters, we would only need small facilities for criminals because more than 85% of the people in prison suffer with mental health and should be in hospitals and centers for rehabilitation programs for safe use, safe supply, and community person-centered plans, not in correctional centers that are killing and traumatizing people and their families to further cause harm with their lack of abilities. I've said it before and I'm going to say it again. The system is not broken. It was built this way. Meet people where they're at with person-centered plans. We need to tear down the walls of corrections and build the mountains of opportunities for communities to climb to the top of unity. We all matter. From one bereaved person to another, our loved ones will remain with us as we travel on. Such precious moments do not fade because their time is done. For never will our loved ones be more than a thought away as long as we have breath in us, then in our hearts they will stay. Thank you.
Thank you, Angela. Thank you very much. I'm gonna pass it along to Sean Spalding's sister.
Hi, how are you guys doing? My name is Shanika, and I'll be talking about my brother, Sean Spalding. So my brother, Sean Spalding, was basically transferred to Maplehurst Correctional Facility on a Saturday. When he got there on the Saturday, they did their check-in and whatnot, and he was assigned to his cell, which he was assigned to a cell that he was in by himself, so he didn't have anybody in his cell. The whole day that he was at this facility, he had complained about having stomach aches and not feeling well. Other inmates said that he wasn't feeling well when he was there as well. He had asked to see a nurse, the nurse that was there. When she had seen him, she offered him gravel and said to him, like, nothing's wrong with you, you're fine. Like, go back onto the range. They sent him back onto the range. He then again, I guess he like tried to like wait it out for a little bit. Then he had asked again to see the nurse because he was in a lot of pain. He wasn't feeling well at all. They refused to let him see the nurse. I believe the second time they refused to let him see this nurse. Again, before lockup, he was I don't know how they're set up, like where their phones are, but from the inmates that wrote their own details of what happened, they said that he was underneath the phone booth area, like crouched up on wherever there's a bench. I guess he was crouched into like a fetal position. Like for the remainder of the day, he was just under there, crouched into a ball. When he was sitting at the tables prior to that, he was like still crouched over into a ball with like his head on the table and his arms folded. There's a guard that I guess around, I don't think 7 or something, when they locked them back up for the night, the last guard to speak to to him. He had told the female guard that he wasn't feeling well, he's sick, he wants to see a nurse. She had replied to him, like, as he's on the, like, crouched into a fetal position, that, like, you need to get up. I don't have time for this. Like, I need to start my weekend. And that's based off of other inmates hearing her say that to him. Then he was put back into his cell. Like, when he did eventually get up, he was put back into his cell. From that, I was told he was in his cell for like hours after that, just like, I guess, screaming, yelling. He asked the guard, like, after like hours of going through that, being sick, I guess, in his cell, crouching into a ball or doing whatever he had to do to like try to comfort himself. Um, so that, going into that, like, I would say maybe 26 hours later of him being in pain and asking for help. So 26 hours going into 27 hours, because he had an intestinal heart attack that lasted 27 hours. So in his last hour of like trying to get help, I guess the last guard that checks on them around in the morning, because I'm guessing maybe this person saw him around 4 or so, because from my acknowledgement, he passed away at like around 6 a.m., like 6:30 a.m. He passed away in the morning. So when he asked the last guard for help, when that person, I guess, didn't want to help him, ignored, after, I guess, he was making noise in his cell or whatnot, they went back to check. And when they went back to check on him, he was unconscious, laying on the floor. And I was told that they tried like their best to resuscitate him. They said they did CPR, but like after 27 hours of somebody suffering, like, it took you guys long enough to give this individual CPR or give them help. And the fact that he was literally there, like, I've heard so many other stories, people will switch it around to say he's had an appendix burst. No, he did not. He had something called an intestinal heart attack, which to me is like, I've never heard of something like that. So what I had to like ask questions like, what is that? What do you mean? The answers that I like, the two main answers that I got from like coroners and I guess a one doctor, his conclusion was that it's like an athlete that would be a football player that goes out for a jog one day and they have a heart attack, but instead of a heart attack to your heart, it's your intestinal system and everything, your organs, they're just all shutting down one by one. They told me that it could have been caused by, later on, their like cause of it, like they don't have a legitimate cause to what have caused it, why it was triggered, why it happened to him like that. They said that it could be due to a lack of some type of blood oxygen. It's like a blood deficiency, something that he would have and be able to live with. They said it could be in your bloodline also, like, it could be in other family members. If I have a daughter and so forth, like, we wouldn't know until something triggers it, which causes a chain reaction of that happening to an individual. But for him to be ignored for so much hours, and the fact that he wasn't even in their care for like a whole day, like he just got there on Saturday, and this person has no reason to lie to you guys, no reason to ask you for, like, no suggestion of like, I've swallowed or did any drugs, because he came from another jail prior to that. Like, you guys should have looked in his folder, because I was told from another jail that one of the ones that he came from before, I'm not really sure the name of it, that while he was there, it says in a file that he had complained about stomach aches like a couple of months before that, and they had given him some type of medicine and they didn't hear him complain about it since. So like, if that nurse was doing her job properly, she would have seen that he complained about his stomach a couple of months prior to this situation happening, and you wouldn't have offered somebody gravel. Like gravel is like, I don't get that, why that's always their answer. Like you cannot always give people gravel. Not every stomach ache or something, that illness that somebody is feeling, has anything to do with giving them gravel. Like they need a thorough more check from somebody that is more experienced, that knows what they're doing. Like you need to take people's like if somebody's telling you they're not okay, you need to take that more into consideration, because like from that story alone, like he was only in your care for one day. He died in the morning. He wasn't there for the 27 hours that he was there. He was suffering. You guys, he didn't get a chance to do anything. He got a chance to check in, and he did like die in your facility. And you guys helped to that. When I tried to contact them or reach out to them, they never wanted to speak to me. The only time that that jail was ever happy to speak to me was to collect his belongings. And like when he first passed away, they called that said, if you could come by and we have a box, you could pick it up, and whatever canteen that he had, for them to sign it over. And when I went there, they didn't even have the respect. There was a male and a female guard. I guess they're like older senior guards, because you could tell like there was a man and a woman. They didn't send anybody young. They sent somebody that was there for like years, a man and a woman, and they didn't want to look me in their eyes. That's one thing that always bothered me. Like while I was there, they made minimum eye contact. One of them seemed to know like something, like you could tell they were talking about it prior to me walking in there. And they like made a comment to me also, like, you look a lot like your brother. And I was like, that lets me know that you guys, you're aware of the situation. You guys are talking about it, because if like he's in your care, you guys knew he was there and of the situation. And then after that, to ignore me and act like nothing, or not wanting to speak about it. Like up to this day, they would never let me see like the video footage. I have gotten like lawyers help in like trying to subpoena that footage, hopefully, so they can't destroy it later down the line, because I would like to see it. Like, you know, I have the right, because there's like so many conspiracy stories, even though I know like how he passed, but like I would want to see like what was his last few hours. Like, was he really suffering like that, crouched under a bench? Because like for my mom, that's her only son. To tell her that your only son, like imagine you suffer in a jail cell by yourself. And I've always said to them that we live at Keelan Wilson area. We live right beside the brand new hospital. It literally take you 5 minutes or less for us to get to the hospital. If we called an ambulance, the ambulance should be at our house in like 1 minute. If he was sick and at home, he would have never experienced that. He would have never died, because there's no way that my mom or me would sit in the house and see him like that for hours. Like, he's not a person to act like that. He's not somebody to get sick. We are not those type of people who have like illness to be like, oh, you have the flu and you're like, we don't really get sick often. So when we are, our parents would take that highly serious. Him complaining about his stomach and crouched over, like, he's not like that. He's like a active person. Like, you know, he was always fun, bubbly, like he was always making me laugh. Like, he always had something to say. He's always the type of person that had a goal. And like when he passed, they didn't try to portray the image of somebody that he graduated high school. He went to college for auto body repair. He worked for Chrysler. Like, they don't talk about the good things of your loved ones or any accomplishments that they've made, because they're trying to make them out to be the worst person possible. Like, it's their fault, or this happened to them because of this. No, this happened to them because of your negligence and them not caring, them not wanting to do your job properly. If you don't want to do your job properly, then get a new job field. This is not the field for you. This is not what you should be doing. Like, if you don't want to be here, that's like me going to work. If I don't want to be here, what am I doing here? Go get a different job, get something that you like go sit at home. There's ways where you can sit at home and look for your career path if it's not for you. Like, I would like them to work on that more, because the way that they make people's stories sound or their loved ones is ridiculous. Like, people need to own up to their faults. You need to own up to the mistakes you guys have made, or things you choose like to do that causes somebody their life. Because a lot of their negligence in their like incidents of people having appendix burstings, dying, or drug overdose, are being abused in their care and stuff. Like, how does that even happen? Like, how does so many of these incidents continue to happen? And it's like so many similar stories, and then they just like, how are they able to shove it under the rug? Like, it doesn't happen, we don't know what you're talking about. Like, they'll act like, I've never heard of this person's story before, like, who are you talking about? And the minute you start talking about, they'll be like, oh, okay, yes, I do remember something like this happened. So I just want to bring more awareness and more light to that, because I find it ridiculous that they treat people's loved ones like it's nothing. They need to remember that they have loved ones of their own. And how would you feel if this is your mom, your dad, your brother, your sister, your child? And yeah, thank you. That's what I have to say.
No, thank you so much. And, for people that are listening, that might not know that prisoner, when you become incarcerated, you lose your OHIP status, and prisoners are excluded from our federal and healthcare acts, right? And so there's actually a private, like, correctional budget that will go directly towards paying for prisoners' healthcare. And so I think that when we're looking at worthiness and the laws and acts that we have that are excluding certain people, when I'd probably say 85% of our prisoner population is innocent until proven guilty. They're in the remand parts of the institutions remand status. And so with our healthcare is that you have officers who are making healthcare decisions that are not healthcare providers, right? You have people that are being admitted into the institutions and files, but correctional officers can't read those files because they're not healthcare providers. So this is like the transfer of information between institutions when they follow the prisoner. It can't even be accessible to the correctional officers if they even wanted to be a little bit more compassionate and have a little bit of healthcare responsibility. And so this is like another bigger problem too, right? We don't have enough healthcare staff in our institutions. Not all institutions have 24-hour doctors. They don't have 24-hour nursing. And so when these situations happen, your life is reliant on a correctional officer who either likes you, doesn't like you, doesn't want to move from their little cubicle to do proper rounds, who doesn't even want to do their rounds and just ignores people if they're screaming. And so, I think that people that are listening to this, those are things that you can advocate for. Those are things to think about when we have this election coming up, about what kind of leaders we want. And also, how do we get people that are incarcerated back included into the provincial and federal healthcare acts. I'm going to keep it moving. Yusuf, would you like to tell us a little about Soli?
Sure. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I greet you with the greetings of peace. And I hope that we can build that society that's filled with justice, peace for the Jordans, for the Sean Spaldings, for the Suleiman Fakiris, for the Justin St. Amours, for the Cass Gettys, for the Ashley Smith. A society tempered on dignity, on honor, and a society where all of us have the same value in our lives, and that we are not viewed as being cheap because we suffer from some form of mental illness, or when we go through this incarceration system that I call the fatal nexus between mental illness and the incarceration system. First of all, I want to salute Lindsay and her team at the Toronto Prison Rights Project for having the courage and the wherewithal for continuing this discussion, and because it's not a discussion, it's a conversation about life and death. And I want to salute the team that's doing this important work, and a special thank you to to Laureen, to my friend Laureen, to my friend Angela, to Sean's sister, to my friend Kevin for joining in this discussion. We've crossed paths, all of us, with the speakers. I've known Laureen for almost 5 years. A lot of people don't know there was a 1 week difference between Suleiman's murder and Justin's death. They both died in December 2016. And Jordan happened to die in June 1st, 2020 at the Central East Correctional Center. And Sean also recently died in the Milton jail. So, and then, I've met Kevin a couple times in our rallies in London, and we've had conversations that we should not be having. Today's a tough day because the 1 million or so Canadians and the 1.6 billion Muslims across the world started Ramadan. It's the day where all Muslims across the globe and in this country fast from dawn till sunset. And today, every first day of Ramadan and the last day becomes particularly hard because Suleiman, and I'll talk about his gifts and his tragic end in a second, but he was the intellect of my family. And so this was a month where when we would pray, he would lead the prayers, right? This was a month when there was questions about our faith, would be Suleiman. Imagine someone having mental illness and being an intellect. Go figure. I'm being sarcastic. This is to the individuals listening. People with mental illness, they're not just that part. There's much more to their identity than just their diagnosis. They're much more than that. And I want all of us who's listening to remember that. And Suleiman was just like that. He was much more than his illness. But today, a day like today is extremely hard because when we break our fast this evening with my family, there won't be Sali. This is the 6th year now without Sali. And it's painful, it's difficult. And it's a day like today that really his presence is really missed. And usually every Friday I go to his grave right before the sunset, right before the sun sets, to give my salams or say salutations. And every day is painful, but every day I promise, it's a promise and it's a reminder to myself why the work that we're doing that needs to happen. It's a promise to him as well to say that, Sali, I'm not going to give up until I give my last breath to fighting for you. One of the comments that both Sean's sister and I know Jordan's mom, Angela, and Laureen, Justin's mom, brought up the idea of they didn't use this word, but the accountability. There is no accountability and transparency in the system because the reason these numbers are so high, the reason this happens is because there is an elusive part of accountability, an elusive part of transparency. You have to fight tooth and nail to get transparency within the system in itself, and this will continue to happen, right? And the reason there is so many deaths is because certain individuals, especially the ones that suffer from mental illness, their lives are viewed as cheap. Simple as that. Whether it was Jordan's story, Jordan shared, whether it was Justin, whether it was Cass Geddes, whether it was Ashley Smith, whether it was Sean, and there's so many, whether it's Abdul Rahman Hassan or Suleiman Fakiri, their lives are viewed as cheap. That is to say that here's another body, go bury him or her, and that's it. And the system operates in a way when there is no transparency. This will continue to happen. And sorry, when it's hard to get transparency and when there's no accountability, this will happen, right? But this isn't a policy issue. These are lives that we're talking about. These are brothers, sisters, sons, uncles, mothers, and fathers. This fight, the conversation, ladies and gentlemen, whoever's listening around, is not just a policy. We are fighting for the soul of our nation, of our society, for our grandkids, for our children. Remember that. Now let me talk about Suleiman's story, his violent murder. I don't, and this is a term that we have to think about. Why am I using this word murder? Let me give you facts and you can decide for yourself. Yet more than 5 years after his tragic murder, to this day, there has not been criminal accountability into the beating death of Suleiman Fakiri. He was in Central East, the same jail where Jordan lost his life, 11 days. In those 11 days, Suleiman was held in segregation. In those 11 days, my family was not able to see him, although we drove literally, unlike other families, and I'm going to talk about my privilege, unlike other families, had a car, had an ability to go to Lindsay. we drove. Now imagine if you're a single mother, or you're a newcomer, or you're First Nations, when you don't have those abilities, certain abilities, how much harder would it be? But this was a family that had certain things that we could do. We drove to Lindsay 4 times, my parents 3 times, my brother and myself once, and we weren't able to see Sully. We weren't able to see Sully. And Lindsay was 45 minutes from our hometown of Ajax, Ontario. Okay. And folks that know this is that people that suffer from schizophrenia, especially the illness of schizophrenia, and one of the things that's extremely important is that there needs to be always a support base, specifically a family support. And this was the first and only time in Suleyman's life where when he was diagnosed, he was not able to see his family. And sometimes I have nightmares thinking about what those 11 days were spent for my beautiful brother. I mean, there's times when he was suffering, when he was with us, we would take shifts in his room of, sleeping in the same room, because a lot of people with schizophrenia suffer from insomnia, right? But we weren't able to see Sully. Now, in those 11 days, they put him in segregation. According to the, let's talk about the eyewitness and then talk about the coroner's report. According to the eyewitness, Mr. John Thibault, Suleyman, basically, Mr. Thibault, one of the comments he made, according to him, was one of the guards actually put his knee on his neck. And Mr. Thibault was called by the OPP in their investigation as a credible witness. Okay? But this is the same man that the first police service, the Cuarta Lakes Police Service, didn't even speak with, right? They closed the case before they could even speak with Mr. Thibault. But the OPP called Mr. Thibault's testimony legitimate, credible. Yet to this day, there's still no criminal accountability for Suleyman's beating death. Now let's talk about that so-called beating death, according to the coroner's report. And there was 2 coroner's reports, but let's talk about the facts at hand. These are undisputed facts. 50 bruises on his body. Both legs and his hands are tied. Pepper sprayed twice. More than a dozen guards involved in his death as they were going in, coming out. These were the final moments of my late brother's murder. My late brother's death. And according to the chief pathologist, Dr. Michael Polanyi, who argued that Suleyman's death was directly related to the guards' actions. Yet more than 5 years after his murder, there has not been criminal accountability into Suleyman's beating death. Ladies and gentlemen, this is not some faraway land or cousins down south in the United States. This is in our backyard. This is in our own province of Ontario, in our own beautiful country of Canada, where a tragic death that happened. Among many tragic deaths, I wish I could say one, among many tragic deaths. The families are here to prove that to you. So, vigils upon vigils, talks upon talks, conversations among partners in partners in different fields, whether it's legal, whether it's medical, whether it's activists. Still no criminal accountability into the murder of Suleyman Fakiri. Why? The answer is very simple. Is that individuals within the practitioner of that system are not accustomed or used to. And Kevin could probably talk about this more. How often, and it's a question that I want all of us to think of, how often do you see someone who's a correctional officer that gets held criminally accountable for their actions? You can count with your fingers. I'm not a lawyer, but I'm sure you can go figure out. You can literally count with your fingers. Whether it's those guards that saw Ashley Smith, who tragically lost her life, right? They say Ashley Smith killed herself. Really, Ashley Smith killed herself? You watched her do this. Where's the accountability for that? Or what happened to Jordan? What happened to Justin Saint-Amour, or to Cass Geddes, or to Sean Spalding, or to Abdurrahman Hassan and Lindsay as well in 2015? We can talk all we want. We can have all these conversations. But if we do not push our leaders vis-a-vis at the municipal level, at the provincial level, at the federal level, there will be more of these conversations. But these conversations that I commend all of us to do, and it's important that we're doing this, but The people that are practitioners in that system need to take these conversations and they need to be held accountable. Policy needs to be transformed into real action. Conversation leading to policy needs to be transformed to real action. What does real action happen? When someone dies under your watch, there should be accountability. How that does look like, the general public and leaders can tell you that, but it should not be of, our sincere condolences, we wish you all the best, more or less. No, what about these individuals' mothers and sisters and brothers who suffer and suffer? My family paid a price with Suleiman's murder. By him being gone that night, we still pay a price to this day. They took him from us. They took their uncle away from their nephews and nieces. They took my brother, who I escaped to come to this country as a refugee from Afghanistan. We escaped war, but it seemed that my late brother's own tragic death continues to traumatize my family. And it will traumatize. But guess what? It's better for us to fight this fight so we prevent another of these tragedies happening. And if the system does not want to do that, then we as a society, then we as individuals that have been affected with our leaders must come together. We have no choice. I leave you with these final words in this part of the discussion. I want to tell you about Suleiman. Suleiman taught my mom how to read. He taught me how to pray. He taught my brother how to drive. He was studying engineering at Waterloo. He spoke English, Farsi, and Arabic. But I'm not going to let his murder and his death be the last part of his story. I can't. His last part of his story will be inspiring people in this country to build that better society, just like it will be for Justin, for Jordan, for Shauna, and the many others. And for all of us who's listening, ladies and gentlemen, know this. You cannot turn a left cheek, because if you turn a left cheek today, it might be your loved one, and it might be too late. May God bless all of you. May we continue to have blessings in our efforts, and may we continue to be able to work together to build that better society, because the time is now. The moment is now. We don't need more examples. They're already waiting in the cemetery for us to know. Peace and greetings be upon all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Yusuf. I think that the stories that are being told today are the truth. And when we talk about negligence within the institutions, I think the lack of acknowledgement and accountability from Sylvia Jones, from the superintendents of the institutions, from the correctional officers that are involved with the negligence, it starts at the top with Sylvia Jones, and Sylvia Jones has not acknowledged any of the families and is not doing anything to show that she actually cares about the continuous numbers that we're seeing of people that are passing away inside due to neglect from the officers, due to neglect from the system inside, due to the neglect of not having policies or legislation that is going to ensure that people inside. The mandate of corrections is care, custody, and control. There's no care that happens inside. It's just custody and control, and that control is taking away people's lives. And so, I think we're going to get into that further into the conversation. But I do want to introduce Kevin Egan. And Kevin is a lawyer who has been actively involved in and really representing and supporting a lot of the families when their loved one passes away inside. So Kevin, would you like to give us a little intro and maybe just tell us how you got into the first inquest, but also just the importance of you being a part of this process?
Sure, and thank you, Lindsay, for inviting me. I want to start by acknowledging the other panelists who have suffered immensely, who are still feeling the pain of what the ministry did to their loved one. It's an absolute embarrassment. It's a shame. It's a sin. The way the ministry administers what they call correctional facilities in Ontario. Lindsay touched a little bit on the mandate of the ministry. If you look at Section 5 of their enabling legislation, it says that the function of the ministry is to provide an environment for prisoners to successfully rehabilitate and reintegrate. And I ask you how that can possibly occur when they're put into cages and treated like animals. That's not how you rehabilitate or reintegrate anyone. And especially people who may have a history of trauma, who may have a history of drug abuse or alcohol abuse, who have come from poverty or disadvantaged circumstances, who have mental health issues. That's not how you treat them. And no scientist would ever support the way our ministry runs these detention centers. So the question was, how did I become involved? In 2009. So I'm about to enter my 14th year involved with the Ministry of Community Safety and Corrections in Ontario. An individual came to me. She had been across the street from my office at Tim Hortons, and she just saw the sign above the door, lawyers. So she thought she'd drop in because a friend of hers brother had died at Elgin Middlesex Detention Center. I had been in the jail a few times. I had dabbled a little bit in criminal law and had gone in to visit inmates, but had only got into basically the lobby area. There's a rotunda where lawyers can meet with inmates. I had no idea what was beyond that rotunda until I started this inquest. Randy Drysdale died in 2009. We finally got to an inquest in 2011, which I'm now learning is pretty fast because we're waiting for, I believe it's 14 more inquests from EMDC, some of them as old as 9 years. Adam Kargas, 2013, still no inquest. So anyway, I attended this inquest. It was a huge eye-opener for me. The overcrowding, the filth, and the inhumanity was just something that I never expected was occurring in Ontario, in Canada, and in my city, London, Ontario. There were 5 lawyers at that inquest representing various parties. The evidence was that Mr. Drysdale had been punched in the head and dragged into a washroom. That's what emerged from the evidence at the inquest. But the facility itself had said that, he slipped and fell in the shower. He died of a bleed to his brain. As the evidence emerged, it became clear that he was murdered. And I was the only one of the 5 lawyers that argued homicide. The others argued unexplained or accidental. And the jury came back with homicide. No one was ever held accountable. No one lost their job for not watching what was going on. Recommendations were made, one of which was, surprisingly, in 2011, they didn't even have video monitoring in the facility. They installed cameras in 2013. And to this day, they don't watch those cameras in real time. So I started, when I became aware of just how bad things were, I started going to the media. I started, whenever I had the opportunity, shouting from the rooftops that things had to change or someone else was going to die. And unfortunately, I was right. I didn't know how right I was, because following Randy Drysdale's death, there were 18 more deaths at EMDC. Murders, suicides, drug overdoses, and lots of unexplained deaths. And as I alluded to, many of them we haven't had the opportunity of going to an inquest to at least provide some cathartic process for the families. Families are waiting all this time just to get the details behind their loved ones' last minutes. And it's as I said, it's inhumane, it's unkind, it's not what we pretend this country to be. So following Randy Drysdale's death, we had the death of Adam Kargus in 2013, a murder, a brutal murder, where guards weren't watching. 3 guards were charged with failing to provide the necessaries of life. No one was convicted. A number of guards lost their jobs. Most of them have been reinstated because they were fired for not following rules. And the reason they were reinstated was the adjudicators who decided to reinstate them found that, in fact, the rules were never enforced. So how can you fire somebody for not following rules that they don't enforce? So that's the excuse. That's the reason these people who weren't doing their jobs got their jobs back, because they don't have to follow rules. The rules are just there to kind of be a salve to their conscience. They don't mean a damn thing. So when these guards were fired, there was a walkout. The other correctional officers stood in solidarity with these people who were fired for not doing their job. And there was a lockdown at the jail for several days. One of the individuals who was locked down had some underlying mental health issues. And being locked in a little tiny cell with 2 or 3 other people who maybe aren't that friendly to you can be very difficult for someone with mental health problems. Be difficult for anybody. Anyway, Keith Patterson started acting out. And he was flooding his cell. He was doing other things that they ended up deciding to put him in segregation for. Well, they didn't have enough segregation cells. So they locked him in a shower and handcuffed him in the shower for several hours. He was later moved to a cell, and they had what they called suicide prevention blankets. They gave him one of those, but they were so poorly maintained, and they ignored the number of times that they were washed in bleach, that these sheets could be torn into a strip, a ligature, in the blink of an eye. And we actually saw that. A correctional officer on the stand in Keith Patterson's inquest stood on the stand and ripped one of these suicide prevention blankets in the blink of an eye and had a ligature. Keith Patterson was seen with this ligature for several hours that day. He was continuing to act in when he was put in a segregation cell. And I've seen the video. He put his hands out of the little doorway in the cell door, the little hatch, and you can see the ligature drop down. You can see him tying a knot as he tied it onto the hatch. And he pulled it back in, and he hung himself. And that was all captured on a camera that nobody was watching. Not only was nobody watching the monitor, there was no monitor hooked up to the camera in the first place. So it was just a friggin' camera. Since then, I've done, again, there was a recommendation that they watch the cameras in real time, and the ministry said no. I did another inquest at EMDC, Mike Fall, same recommendation, among many others, which the ministry is just saying, no, we're not going to watch them in real time. We're not going to monitor the cameras. Since then, I've done Floyd Deliri and Justin Thompson's inquest. at EMDC. Same recommendations. In fact, the jury in those inquests, the number one recommendation was tear the place down and start over. That was a well-informed jury after hearing almost 3 weeks of testimony. That was their number one recommendation. Tear the place down and start over because this isn't working. You know what the ministry's response was? That was in March 16th, 2020 was when the jury made that recommendation. March of this year, 2022, we finally got the government's response to the recommendation. You know what they had to say about tearing the place down and starting over? Well, we are going to build a new one in Thunder Bay and one to serve Eastern Ontario. And that's it. That's the extent of their answer. They're not going to do anything about EMDC. They're going to just let people keep dying. So I've been involved with those families. I've also been involved with the two other families that have had inquests in regard to EMDC, Laura Strawn's family and Jamie High's family to a lesser extent. But we're waiting as well for inquests into the deaths of a number of other people. And sorry, I'm just pulling it up on my phone here. And I represent all of these families, unfortunately. Murray Davis, whose inquest started with Floyd Delury and Justin Thompson's inquest, was postponed. And it was actually supposed to be carrying on this week. But again, it's been postponed because of COVID and the unavailability of juries. We're waiting for that. We're waiting for Adam Cargus' inquest, as you know. Justin Struthers, Ronald Jenkins, Jamie Peugeot, who died, I believe he was murdered. And we'll get to that eventually, I hope. Sean William Turan Brightman, Chase Blanchard, Malcolm Ripley, Tyler Lancha, Clayton Bissonnette, and Brandon Marchand. So those are the inquests that we're still waiting for at EMDC. And Angela, of course, I've talked to you as well about Jordan's inquest and when, if ever, we're going to get to that. I was actually invited to teach coroners about the Coroners Act and the process. And so I did a meeting, something like this, with a whole bunch of prospective coroners. And I told them about all the systemic problems. Boy, the people that run the coroner's office weren't very well pleased with me. But I told them straight, this thing is a paper tiger. You know, you can make all the recommendations in the world, but there's nothing, there's no teeth. You can't force the ministry to do anything. No matter how strong the recommendations are or how well informed the jury is when they make them. Nothing comes of it. It's a shame, it's a disgrace. And families are waiting for years and years and years to hear about it. I've done two other inquests, and one was at Maplehurst. It was a similar story, where a nurse was totally incompetent, heartless, mean. Joey Woods. Joey was a guy who was injured fighting for Canada. He was in the military, and he was injured as a paratrooper. He developed an opioid addiction, and he had PTSD. His drug addiction got him in trouble, and he ended up in Maplehurst. And one night, they were distributing the medications. They didn't have overnight nursing staff, so his sleeping pill was delivered at 6:30 at night. He was expected to take a sleeping pill at 6:30 at night. along with the pain medications he was taking, which were supposed to be given 3 times a day. That 3 times a day had to happen within an 8-hour window. So he went around the clock without any pain medication because they didn't staff the nursing complement. So this nurse came to his cell door. And the way it's supposed to work, they're supposed to open the cell door so they can see the whole person. But they didn't. They handed the drugs through the hatch. And Joey took the drugs and he just kind of tipped his hand a little bit so that the drugs fell on some blankets that he put on the floor so that he could take them later at the appropriate time. And the nurse saw it, called the guard, and they opened the door. They took his medication. Said, "You don't get any meds tonight." They didn't ask him why he was doing that. They didn't care. The nurse had to get on because she had 100 more people to give meds to. And so Joey Woods, without his medications and already suffering depression, committed suicide in his cell. He was found shortly after he had done the act, but not quickly enough for his life to be saved. Had the correctional officer done her tour as she was supposed to, she would have seen it, but she didn't. The logbook that the correctional officers are supposed to enter the tours in showed she had done a tour. And they had video. So I pissed a few people off in that inquest too, because I said, let's watch the video. So I waited for the time in her logbook when she said she had checked on his cell. And there was nobody there. She was sitting at her desk writing that she had done a tour when she hadn't. And she killed him. There's no 2 ways about it. That kind of negligence kills people. So we've got Joey Woods at Maplehurst. We've got Marty Tykolas at Hamilton Wentworth Detention Center. I did the super inquest there. It was an inquest into many deaths, and Lindsay, you were there. Marty Tykolas died of a drug overdose. They knew he was a drug addict. And actually correctional officers had alerted the nurses that there was something wrong with him, that he seemed subdued, that he was acting out through the night. So a nurse went to look at him and she found that he had almost no pulse and his blood pressure was alarmingly low. So that nurse wrote in her logbook, "Will follow up," and never followed up. When asked later, Marty died about a half an hour after she left him alone in his cell. She said, "Well, he had a pulse." I mean, any idiot off the street would know that somebody with a pulse like that and reduced blood pressure, who had a habit of taking opioids, was in trouble. But she didn't care. And she said, "Oh, that note about Will follow up, that was Will, the other nurse. His name was Will. He was supposed to follow up." And it just goes on and on and on. So we've got, unfortunately, we've got all of these deaths in different institutions in Ontario, and very, very little being done about it. Lip service, foot dragging, deflecting blame, not taking responsibility. That's our provincial government. So It's heartbreaking. It's just wrong. And so several years ago, I started a class action in regard to the conditions at Elgin Middlesex Detention Center. Not just the deaths, but the overcrowding and the violence and the lack of any kind of programming, the filth, the lack of health care. And we're making some progress. I can tell you that. And I hope to have more to report on that very soon. I've also become involved in a province-wide class action in regard to staffing shortage related lockdowns. Because what happens is these correctional officers like to take weekends off in the summer, like to have lots of time off. And so they'll book off for the weekend, and the inmates get locked in their cell for 72 hours. Sometimes there's 2 or 3 guys in a cell designed originally for one. And they're overcrowded. You know, that you want to use the toilet. Well, there's 2 other guys there. There's no privacy. It creates violence. So we've got, I'm teamed with Koski Minsky and Paul Champ and others in advancing a province-wide class action against Her Majesty the Queen for the way she runs her jails. So in addition to that, I have a lot of individual claims, you know, people who have been beaten, who will never be the same, who have brain injuries, who have severe psychological injuries as a result of being in these conditions. It's something that wears on me. I know at inquests, I've broken down and cried. And so I can only imagine what you people are going through. And so again, my heart goes out to you. And I want to say I admire all of you for the strength that you're showing in such adverse circumstances. And I think it's clear that together we're stronger. And so we need to keep fighting this, keep shining that light, and keep showing anger. You know, we need to have people call their MPPs and express their outrage. We need to have more demonstrations. When Bam Bam was murdered most recently at EMDC, there was a huge protest, and it certainly got the ministry's attention. But rather than apologize to the family, Sylvia Jones came down to EMDC and she gave all the guards a pat on the back and said, "You're frontline heroes." So her constituents need to know the story. You know, the people in Orangeville that voted her in should be told about what she's supporting, what she's excusing. And you know, we need to keep on making noise. It's entrenched, and it's going to require a huge shift in the way the public thinks about the administration of justice to see long-term change. We can put Band-Aids on it, but we need to change the mindset in Ontario. These are human beings who have had unfortunate things happen in their lives that got them in trouble with the law. The idea of putting someone in jail is to separate them from society, not to further punish them, not to make them feel like they're unworthy, and not to kill them. So thanks.
Thanks, Kevin. And for myself, I just want to thank you for being the person that these families can come to. It's a lot on your shoulders, but you care, and you haven't stopped fighting. And so, you know, just thank you for being that support for the families. I do definitely want to, you know, talking about Sylvia Jones and that her response to somebody dying inside is to go down and pat the backs of the officers. I'm curious from the families, have you, any of you heard from Sylvia Jones, or have you heard from anybody from the ministry in regards to your loved ones? Maybe we'll go to Angela first.
No, I haven't heard from anybody. I did get a call at one point from a Deborah Richardson, basically to say, I'm so sorry about the loss of your son. And that was it. She never returned any phone calls. None of the questions I asked were ever answered. And that was the end of anything. Actually, every time I tried to reach out to anyone, I just seemed to kind of hit brick walls.
What about you, Laureen? Have you heard from Sylvia Jones? You're muted. We can't hear you. Maybe I'll,
There.
there you go.
How's that?
That's
Okay,
great.
sorry. It takes a little while. I'm 60 years old and I'm not too good at technical stuff.
You're
Sorry.
great. No worries.
Well, I haven't heard from Sylvia. I have emailed her. I emailed Prime Minister Trudeau. After about a year after I emailed Sylvia, I'm still waiting for Sylvia to reply to me or call me or anybody from her office to contact me. And Trudeau, well, he's my best friend. So yeah, him, well, he told me to contact the Honorable Sylvia Jones. And so, yeah, I'm still, you know, waiting for anybody to let me know why my son is dead.
What about you, Shanika? Have you heard anything about Sean?
No, I've never been contacted, or none of these people have ever reached out to say anything ever at all.
Have you made attempts to get in touch with them?
I believe I had emailed, I believe Sylvia or one of those people in the beginning, and they, like, nobody in their field or anybody in the jails or those type of people have any like intentions in contacting you back. It's like more of a going in a circle, like a secretary or this, or they'll get back to you, or somebody will eventually get back to you, or maybe you should try like this number, or like try another email or something, which I don't know how many times you're going to email somebody and they don't reply to you. So
Yeah, it definitely seems like a pattern. Yusuf, have you heard anything?
10 of the 12 guards responsible for Sully's murder are still employees of the Ontario government. 2 of them were fired. I think that says a lot about whether I've heard or not, Lindsay, from the minister. And also, if anybody has a moment, you go to our YouTube page later on and you could see Sully's story being brought up by the justice critic at the Ontario Parliament during question period. And you can hear the minister's response. But I will say that it seems to be very, very difficult for admitting any fault, right? All the whatever government is involved.
You're very right with that. And, you know, and Kevin brought up some experiences of the inquest where they showed evidence that, you know, that a log book that correctional officers need to fill out. They say that they did their rounds, but then we're watching videos and that doesn't happen. And, you know, being at the inquest that Kevin was speaking about in Hamilton with about 8 people that were involved in the inquest, that was actually, you know, I know that things happen inside the jails that not everybody knows about, but to be able to watch this inquest, to see the evidence, to see the officers lie about where they were, about what their job is, and then for nothing to happen to them. It's infuriating. And you know, and so I think that with these, when the inquests happen, like there has to be something more than just the recommendations. And for people that are watching here, when the inquest is over, there's a bunch of recommendations for the institution to implement that would prevent another death from happening. Those recommendations aren't legally binding, which means that the institutions actually don't have the pressure and they don't have any legal push in order to implement those recommendations. And there's been decades of these inquests and these recommendations, all of these stories and the lists of names that we have. Things keep happening. The one thing that remains the same is that the correctional officers are not doing their job. And I have no idea how, if you do not have people that are that hold correctional officers accountable, who does? And like, are these inquests even valuable for the people, for the families, and for the people that have lost their lives? Like, it's just, it's very bureaucratic, it's very political, and it doesn't offer closure or even a little bit of hope that maybe things will change if the families are gonna share about their stories, if they're gonna go through the inquest. Like, you just want a little bit of change so it doesn't happen to somebody else. But really what it seems to come down to is that our politicians and the people that we're electing, it is a bunch of lip service, and that they actually just don't care. And that's the message that we're seeing, is that they actually just don't care what happens to people when they are incarcerated. And so, you know, I think that another great example of how they don't care is that some of the families, especially down at EMDC, which is London Jail, and I know that at Maplehurst, some of the families were putting up crosses and memorials out front of the institutions. And so maybe, Shanika, do you want to speak to a little bit about the cross and the memorial that you put up for Sean?
Yeah, so there was a cross laid for my brother and I believe maybe two other young gentlemen. Sorry, I just can't think of their names right now. But their crosses were laid at the same time at a crossing lay ceremony right in front of the jail. Like when you enter, like there's like a little hill area, and they had these little wooden crosses that are white, and they had put them up with their names on it. And I was told that the crosses were, well, at least my brother's was taken down. And when I asked for what reason is his cross being taken down, they said it's traumatizing to their staff that have to drive into the facility each and every single day, and they have to be reminded of something of this situation that this happened there. I was like, what does this have to do with me though? Like, what does this have to do with this cross? Like, you made your trauma. He didn't traumatize you. You're making his trauma traumatize you. Your guilty conscience is traumatizing you, not a wooden cross. What is a wooden cross? Sitting in the grass in front of the building. Like, you could drive in and literally look left. Like, you don't need to look up there if it's like bothering you. Like, just little things like that, like they just go out their way to say like you're being traumatized. What about somebody's family that has to like live with that each and every single day, or go into their house or walk by something that reminds them of somebody every day in their home? So for you to want to go to work and say that, oh, I'm traumatized because you put a crosshair with somebody's name, well, they passed there in your facility under your guys' watch. So I don't see why you guys can't watch that cross every day when you go into the building. So like they took that down and told me that if I had a problem with that, that I could go to their Hamilton, some courthouse or Ministry of Hamilton on like down there, that I could go file paperwork on behalf of that. And I was told by other people that had crosses removed like that, they'll just prolong it and like put it off. Like it's a joke to them. And when each time you call in, it's like they just have excuse after excuse. Call the jail, like they would like say they would put my call on like hold give this a second, and then they would be like, okay, well you can message on this voicemail, or they'll be like, could you call back? I'll be like, okay, what's a good time to call to speak to this person, or like when are they at their desk? And they would just give me like a runaround, to the point where I was just like, it to me it's pointless that you guys just let me know that within the faculty that you have a guilty conscience, because like I don't see the purpose of you removing something so minimum as like a little cross that you can literally like hardly see. If you're driving from a distance, I don't think that you could really read the name on there to know exactly which cross or something. So like that's within people's own conscience at that faculty, that you feel some type of way within yourself that this is traumatizing to you. Like it doesn't make any sense to me at all, but that was their excuse to me. And just a constant runaround and nobody wanting to listen, and just like no reply back to the situation.
Yeah, you know, I think down in London too, very similarly, but it got a lot more heightened just because London has more deaths, and families have been rallying there every week for about 3 years and showing up to these memorial crosses that they've put up, and the institution and the correctional officers filed a union grievance that it's affecting their work safety and their ability to come to work. And so that's when Sylvia Jones decided to go down to visit the officers of EMDC, and then they have been they were removed by officers and by the institution. When Brandon Marchand was murdered at EMDC, a lot of people were going there and throwing shoes up into the trees, because every time the crosses were put in the ground, they would show up the next day and the crosses were removed. And it became this, it almost seemed like this cat and mouse game between the officers playing on the families and their feelings and the people that they've lost. Kevin, I'm not too sure. Can you speak a little bit more to that situation with the crosses at EMDC?
Yeah, a little bit more. The crosses were removed, as you say, Lindsay, following a grievance where one of the correctional officers complained about the trauma that it caused her to see these crosses every day on the way into work. Now, that particular correctional officer also gave testimony at Floyd Deliri's inquest about the fact that she was sitting in her office reading a novel around the time that Floyd died, and she could hear noises in the unit, but didn't bother to look at the monitor beside her. Instead, continued to read her novel. Now, she is somehow traumatized by the crosses. You would think she might be more traumatized by going into the institution and actually being in the spot where the individuals died. I think that people should be reminded when they screw up, when they cause somebody's death. They should be reminded every day, don't do it again. Those crosses should be there. In addition to having removed the crosses, the ministry has now put up no trespassing signs very close to the roadway. So, you know, people have a right to protest, and people are continuing to do it. They continue to go to EMDC and walk across the roadway at shift change, holding signs. A number of them have been hit by cars driven by correctional officers. And we have some of that on video. It's just unbelievable that these correctional officers, supposedly the people charged with taking care of inmates, treat them and their families with such disdain that they'll actually drive their cars at them if they complain about the way their loved ones have been treated. So those crosses are now down the road at another business, a private property. They're in a place where correctional officers will see them if they're on their way to work. And I believe that there's some project underway to have crosses put at the other side of that roadway so that it doesn't matter what direction the COs coming to work are coming from, they're still going to see the crosses. Interestingly, the grievance settlement board or whatever that body was that decided the crosses should be moved said in their decision that if they're put up anywhere else that the correctional officers will see on their way to work, they can be removed. Now that is really overstepping anybody's authority. You can't make an order that individuals can't put up a sign on private property. So I'd love to see them try to take them down. I think they'll be surprised at the reaction to that. So you know, what people are continuing to let their voices be heard there, and it is having an effect. I know when I first started this in 2009, the general reaction of the public was, well, you know, they're prisoners. They're just getting what they deserve. That was the knee-jerk reaction of very many people. You hear that less and less. The more we talk about it, the more we keep it in the public eye, the more media attention it gets, the better educated individuals are becoming. And so now I hear people saying, keep up the good work. Somebody needs to talk about this, and we need to make some change. So that's the way change gets made, is we got to just keep on making our noise and shining our light.
Thanks, Kevin. I do actually have a question from the audience for the families. So maybe we will just start with Angela and we can work our way through. But the question is how do y'all get through your days? How do you work on your healing through your grief? Asking as someone who has lost people inside too. So Angela.
I have to really connect with a lot of other people that have lost somebody in similar situations, because honestly, the support network outside, people just can't fathom this feeling. They can't understand how the depths of these things and these dreams I even have, I mean, are traumatizing dreams. And I wake up every morning and I'm sweating and I'm angry, and I have to deal with that from the first half an hour of my day. But I allow myself to do that because I feel like if I put my grief in a space every single day where it's allowed to be loud, obnoxious, and just out of control, then the rest of my day can have some control. And I can kind of say, okay, Jordan, you're here with me and you're here in every single moment, but right now we need to go grocery shopping. Because at one point, grocery shopping was a really hard thing for me. I mean, he was a picky eater. He loved certain things, and grocery shopping was a thing for Jordan and I. He loved food. So grocery shopping was really hard for me. So finding those spaces to put that in and letting him know that he is still with me and that we can get through those days together has been really important for me. And on the other days, it's the other moms and people that have gone through similar losses honestly put my glue together, because without people, I just don't know where I would be.
Thank you. Yusuf?
Thank you for that question, and thank you, Angela, for your beautiful, sincere response. Obviously, there's no right or wrong way. Everybody has their own way. For me, I it's fitting because I come from the Muslim tradition, but I wasn't always close to my faith, and it was only a few years before Salih's death that I got closer to my faith. And the ironic paradox is the source of that was my late brother. I mean, we some of the historical questions and how the faith works, I went through Suleiman, and it's almost like he gave me the blueprint to get through grief. And I look at that. I look at that part, and I look at the last 5 years, and let me be honest with everybody, it's been a very painful 5 years. We're all entering into the 6th year actually now. Depression, loss, not just him, but like loss of feeling like, you go to people asking for help, loneliness. I'm a very proud man in the sense, like, it's hard sometimes when you come from certain cultural communities to ask for help, right? As somebody, we are very grateful to be with our fellow countrymen here in Canada. And so like that in itself was enough, was something to be grateful for. But, these last 5 years, there's a lot of like, I'll be honest with you, like yesterday when I went to his grave, I was in tears. I was literally in tears because of today happening, not the event, but today being the first day of Ramadan, because I felt his taken. And ultimately for me, it's too simple thing. And I'm not trying to reduce it to this, but it's just trying to get everybody from my own perspective is, as a man of faith, we come from very rich traditions, all of us. I leave my, I have faith in my Creator, right? And that we'll always be judged by our deeds, right? We cannot control the results. We can try our best, and then there'll be, our efforts will be accepted, and we work with one another. And then the second part related to that is that, so for me, I always know that at the end of the day, I'm going to try everything I can in a sincere manner, and whatever I can do, for me, that's all I can do. That's the first thing. And then the second thing is that having conversations with these wonderful families and doing this wonderful event and working through allyship, it's to serve humanity is to serve God, right? For me, I see Angela's family. I see Shanika's family. I see Lorena's family. Ashley Smith is like family. I met a couple of weeks ago the mother of Danny Robbins, who lost his life in the West Coast, Maryland. She might be in the call. She's become family. We become family. And there's a saying, you can choose your friends, you don't choose your family, right? And this is very important, right? And so for me, whatever traditions we come, it is our tragedy that brought us together, but we are family to building that better society. And we're going to have our unique nuances. And so our grief will also be tied, but also be unique in different ways, right? And so at the end of the day, we're in this together. And at the end of the day, we're going to use our pain and our difficulty, and as Kevin brilliantly said, and use that anger to build that better society. And we're going to make sure, whether it's in our lifetime, that we make this an election issue. We will make an election. That's why we have leaders like Lindsay and Kevin, that are allies, will make an election issue, because our fellow countrymen, our Canadians across the nation, from coast to coast, from city to city, rural town to rural town, urban area and rural, are counting on us. And we're only stronger together as one, rather than working, because the system wants us to work on a little enclaves. It doesn't work like this. We're in this together. Nous sommes ensemble. And this is what's important.
Thank you, Yusuf. Laureen, how do you get through the days? You're on mute too.
So how do I get through the days? Well, when it first happened, howling worked. I'd howl and cry at the same time. There's still, it's 6 years later, it's still hard. I mean, there's still days I wake up and I just don't want to get out of bed. Even today, the only thing that's keeping me going right now is that I refuse to let my son's death be in vain. My son's death will not be in vain, and he will be remembered, because there will be laws passed with the help of all these lovely people on the panel with me. There will be laws passed, and people will no longer be dying in jail, because the ones that are dying in jail are mentally ill. So, fighting right now is what keeps me going. Fighting and not letting people forget about my son and how he died and how many others like him have died before him and after him. And that's how I make it through today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And Shanika?
Okay. Basically, I just take my days one step at a time. Like you say, sometimes you have a really good day where nothing does bother you, or you may feel happy for a split second, but the person is always going to be on your mind no matter what. Like, it's not even intentional. Like, they're just always going to be a part of you, and they're always going to be throughout your day, every day. Like, you could just see something and it reminds you of them. You could hear something, somebody could say something, you may hear a song, or like just see like it could be like an old commercial, or just like somebody brings something up and you're like, wow, like it just brings back so much memory. So I just go through my days. I just try to take it one step at a time, because sometimes I don't have the best day, because I do think about my brother a lot, because he's like my only sibling that I do know. I have other siblings, but this is one that I've grown up with my whole entire life. So for you to have somebody with you your whole entire life, and then one day to just wake up and then they're like just no longer there, like it's hard for you to deal with that. Like, um and then you just have to see other people, or people may want to talk about it, or like you may be trying to just go through your day and just randomly somebody comes to you and brings it up to you, and you could have been having like the best possible day, and then this feeling comes over you. But then like there's also the people out there that feel like because you can sit and do stuff like this or do public speaking like that, this person may not be hurting that much. But like when you speak about it, like it helps me to speak about it, because like I know other people are going through it as well. I'm not the only one. So I see for myself that people are like have just as much as the same emotion as I do. It helps you to like kind of be a stronger person, but you're just gonna have like you just get to the point where you realize you're just gonna have bad days, or you might have like a bad 5-10 minutes or maybe an hour, and then you'll be okay after that for a little bit. But you're just gonna have that throughout your day, no matter what, every day. It's just a part of you. It's something that you just learn to live with, but it just doesn't go away. It's a part of who you are now.
Thank you. I want you guys to know that I think that you're so strong and very resilient, and I just admire the fight. I admire the anger. I admire your willingness to not back down and not to let your loved ones' names die in vain. I truly, being at that inquest a couple years ago definitely changed my outlook on a lot of things. And, I think that I wish that we can, I'm hopeful that we will change some stuff and get some legislations, because I would really like some justice and some closure for the families. It's not fair to you that you have to continue this on for years until you can maybe find a little bit of answers, if that's even enough. I do want to just, I am looking at the time. I do want to give the families an opportunity to say one last thing, but Kevin, I would like to ask you, what would be the process, and what would a class action look like if the families were to come together and file some sort of class action? Would that give us opportunity to change legislation, or to push for, I don't know, legally binding recommendations? Like, what would that Would it even be successful?
Well, I would hope that actions in most of these cases would be successful. Whether, because the deaths have occurred across quite a few different institutions, whether one class action would be an appropriate thing to do is questionable. Certainly, we can initiate individual actions and possibly combine similar types of occurrences, but I'm not sure that class action would lend itself well to this type of event in numerous institutions. I mean, I guess I haven't turned my mind to it that much. We do have a class action at EMDC that does include the families of deceased individuals. The province-wide class action that we have presently really doesn't contemplate the estates of individuals. But I mentioned Joey Woods. I've got a separate claim in regard to his death at Maplehurst. I've got a claim in regard to Marty Tykolis in Hamilton. We've got a claim in regard to Justin Struthers at EMDC. We settled the one in regard to Adam Cargus already. The others, Drysdale, we also settled. So certainly, I believe that one way to make the ministry stand up and pay attention is to hit them where it hurts. The only thing that matters to them is money. And if we can sue and get awards from the courts, and if that becomes something that occurs regularly, then it's going to be more expensive to leave things the way they are than to change them. I think that's the only thing that speaks to these people. Certainly doing the right thing doesn't seem to resonate with them at all.
Thanks. I appreciate that. And I think that's part of the frustration, that this is just about money. Maybe that will be the next webinar, because I know myself and Toronto Prisoners' Rights Projects and probably some other people listening on the call, we would like to continue these conversations. We want to continue this push. There is an election year coming up. We do want to bring more awareness, and we want to put pressure. And so I guess my final question to the families, and then we will be finishing up the webinar, is what do you want? What do you need from us, or what can we do in the community or as advocates? And with the platform that we have, what do you need from us, and what are you hoping will change in the future? So maybe Yusuf, can we start with you?
No pressure, eh? Okay.
None.
Look, in many ways, it's an important question, but it's also in some ways a loaded question. Look, in terms of the work as activists, or, the work as activists, we must continue to work, whether it's a bunch of our organizations, whether it's Justice for Sully, Toronto Prisoners' Rights Project, other organizations. We must always work. I mean, the simple thing is we must not work on enclaves. We must always have this fusion. Maybe perhaps, Lindsay, what might be great, and we've talked about this over the years, is like we have getting Kevin involved too, like having these meetings, right, together, right, among our groups, and then coming together in a unifying form. And I think, honestly, even with some little intricacies, differences here, I think that'll make us much more powerful. And I think, and there's families that are really hungry for that. And our organization in the process, right now, we're going to be starting the Family Coalition across the nation. Families from all the way in the East Coast, all the way from the West Coast to the East Coast. So we're doing that, and we're going to bring a bunch of families. Yeah, I've spoken to Angela about this before. I've spoken to Lorraine to a lesser extent, and other families. So I think we need to come and work in less enclaves. In terms of what makes change, is very simple. But the problem is it's elusive. we need to make this an election issue. We need to bring certain institutions that need to have what I would call legally binding or implementation. For example, the ombudsman, the office of the ombudsman, they do some incredibly important work. But you could complain to the jail, you can complain about the jail, but the jail cannot be held accountable. So I think what we need to do is that in terms of like getting real systemic change, I think at the beginning, in my humble opinion, I don't know if the audience will agree, is we need to bring this into, because right now, correction, when it comes to corrections, it's not a sexy issue. It's not an issue that like, and I know there's a lot of change since Kevin said since 2009 and now, but it needs to like be brought up into the public eye in even more intense levels, in my opinion. And, politicians need to be asked, what's your plan, right? And I think we need to bring that into the election issue. I want to respect everyone else's time, so I'm going to leave it there, right? We need to make this into a political issue. And then once it becomes a political issue, then we can get to the consultation and do the studies and all that stuff, right? But we need to make this into an election issue, whether it's municipal, provincial, and federal. Right now, we have a provincial election in a couple of months. We need to bring that up. And that's where it needs to start. And then you can bring real systemic change. I'll leave it there because I want to be respectful of other people's time. I do say 5,000 words per minute. So.
Thanks, Yusuf. Let's just go to Shanika. Do you want to, what you need from us, or what you would like from activists, also what you're hoping for, and also whatever else you would like to say?
Honestly, I just think like us as a group, our people, our viewers, just us being more involved, being more louder, like, because like a lot of it gets taken for granted. Like even when I joined other people's marches and rallies and stuff, like you said, these people kind of go out their way to do things. Like I remember I went to a rally, I think it was Sully's rally, and they kind of like try to detour people from the actual facility. Like I drove by the actual police 2 times and they sent me down the opposite road, knowing that this event was like right there. Like you just had to drive towards your right, but they were sending everybody left. I was like, this is crazy. So just more like awareness to it. I think that it would be good if we did a lot more like petitions, like getting more names signed, like even towards like the nursing boards and stuff like that. Because even right now, I'm still going back and forth. I have something coming up in April again with them, due to the fact that they just don't want to own up to their negligence. They try to offer like the nurses only to do like some type of rehabilitation program. I was like, you murder somebody, killed them, like took their life, and you're telling me you're just gonna go to school and what right? How this made me feel, how you've been traumatized. I don't think so. Like I just think like for them to be more held accountable for their actions, from the guards to the nurses to the people that own the actual facilities and these faculties, like more petitions, more things put towards them, because sometimes it could just be just our little voices, but with other people's voices on the outside too, and them signing up. And like the more people you get involved and the more they see, they notice that they can't hide it as much because it's out there, right? More people say they see it. Like you have to eventually start to answer questions. It has to start to go somewhere once it gets more acknowledgement. So like that's all that I kind of hope. And for me to just be more involved, because lately I haven't really been like involved out loud, like more behind the scenes, like just dealing with them behind the scenes, going to like the nursing's board and stuff like that, like just to be like being heard out loud and to make it more like to people's awareness. Yeah, and that's what they have
Thank
to
you.
say.
You're always welcome.
Thank
You're
you.
always welcome. Laureen.
Wow. Okay. Well, I agree with what everybody has said. Now, as for me, I think more accountability and transparency has to be done. You know, and I think more training in mental health. You know, if that's where we're going to be putting our mentally ill children, you know, there should be more training for the guards, you know, because right now, as it stands, we've closed down the asylums and all the facilities for our mentally ill to go to. So the only place to send them is to jail. Like with my son, he was arrested because he was suicidal. And when he threatened his ODSP worker, that's when the doctor believed him. And then the doctor had him charged and had the police come and arrest him and take him to jail from a hospital. And I don't understand how this is legal. My son was there saying he was going to kill himself. She had him arrested and then he was taken to jail where he did, in fact, manage to kill himself. You know, I don't understand why my son couldn't have stayed in the hospital. And maybe today my son would be alive. So I think more transparency also with the hospitals as well. Because right now in Ottawa Carleton Detention Center, there are no psychologists, no psychiatrists, no doctors at all. So my son got to see a nurse who was trying to help him get into St. Lawrence Valley Correctional Treatment Center, which my son was getting out. He only had a month to do. And so, you know, he was awaiting trial. He would have been out on trial. He could have stayed in the hospital and not still be here. And, you know, so I'm really upset about it. I'm still waiting to hear from the superintendent of the Ottawa Carleton Detention Center. And I think the only thing they could do is be more transparent, you know, and have somebody manning that camera. I have a video of my son's last minutes. I can see my son die. And, you know, but they can't watch it while it's happening to save my son. If they would have been on that camera, manning that camera, somebody could have gone in and saved my son. And with that, I'll say thank you.
Thank you, Lorraine. And it's true, we need more accountability and more transparency in these inquests. When we have that evidence and we have that video footage, you know, that should be the accounting force, and officers should lose their job and they should not be reinstated, and they should be held accountable to whatever level that deems fit. I do want to, Kevin, one last question, and this is, if you could say anything to the lawyers that are out there that represent these folks that are experiencing human rights violations, excessive lockdowns, physical abuse, mental abuse, emotional abuse. If you could say anything to the criminal lawyers that have to represent these folks about bringing forward this stuff so that way their clients don't pass away as well, or die due to negligence or murder, what would you say to the lawyers?
Yeah, I think that, you know, certainly the Crown prosecutors, criminal defense lawyers, and justice of the peace need to look at alternatives to incarcerating individuals. We heard somebody earlier, I think maybe it was you, Lindsay, mentioned that most of the people in Ontario detention centers are there on a remand. They're assumed to be innocent according to the law. Yet we lock them away in maximum security prisons and treat them like shit. You know, you look at the system for tracking an individual within the facility. It's called the Offender Tracking Information System. Right away, you're called an offender, even though your presumed innocent according to our Constitution. So it's too easy for defense lawyers to just adjourn a bail hearing, let them stay another week. It's too easy for the Crown to just say, we'll stick them in there, and deal with them next week. And it's too easy for justice of the peace to assume that that's the logical solution is to lock individuals up. There are a lot of alternatives, ankle bracelets, supervision in the community otherwise, or just telling people, come back to court in 2 weeks and we'll deal with your matter. The vast majority of individuals that get in trouble with the law are not a flight risk, and they don't need to be locked up. I think, if I were speaking directly to defense lawyers, I would say fight harder for bail. It should be the go-to solution when somebody's charged and they have to come back to court. Let them out in the community. They're innocent until proven guilty.
Thank you for that. I know that we are a little over time, but that's okay. I really do want to thank you all for coming, for sharing your stories, for talking about your loved ones. I have the utmost respect for all of you and all of the other families. And I just, I want you all to go and take care of yourselves this weekend and the rest of the weekend. And I also just want to, from Toronto Prisoners' Rights Project, I know, and for myself personally, I will stand alongside you any day and in this fight moving forward. And so I just, a lot of respect and admiration, and you guys inspire me. So just thank you very, very much. And I hope that folks that are listening, I know that, definitely some comments and a lot of love that have been coming through the inside, and let's just continue this fight. Thank you all and enjoy your weekends.
So much, everybody.
You.
You.